The first time she said it, the words cut sharper than the sparks flying from the welder's torch. "You can't use this road ever again." Linda Harrow, president of the Cedar Ridge HOA, planted her heels in the gravel like she was staking claim to the whole valley. Behind her, 2 board members bobbed their heads in rhythm, puppets on invisible strings, while a construction crew welded a steel gate across the only road that led home. My boots were still caked in mud from fixing the south fence that morning, but they froze to the earth as I realized what was happening. This wasn't a warning. This wasn't a joke. It was the first shot fired in a war I never asked for a second. I thought maybe I'd wandered into some prank show, hidden cameras tucked in the trees. But when Linda flashed that smug grin and slid a folded notice into my hands, reality slammed me harder than a rifle butt. Gold HOA seal at the top, paragraphs of legal jargon below, and one line that turned my stomach cold. Access to Cedar Ridge roadways restricted unless membership dues are paid in full. My land had never been part of her subdivision, and she knew it. But she also knew something else. The only road to my 60 acres cut straight through Cedar Ridge to it. It wasn't just asphalt and gravel. It was leverage. I stared at the paper, jaw tight. She smirked. "You've got 1 week to decide. Miles, sign on, or stay locked out." Behind her, sparks hissed as the gate beam fused shut. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the kind of rage that simmers slow and deep. Linda thought she'd cornered me, forced me into a pen with no way out. What she didn't know was that I'd spent decades as a military engineer, trained to find ways through walls, under obstacles, and over barricades far worse than a suburban gate. She had no idea she'd just lit the fuse on something she couldn't contain. That night, I sat on my porch, the gravel road stretching quiet under a sliver of moonlight. My deed sat heavy in my lap, every survey line sharp as the day I bought it. I had chosen this land for peace. For the first time since walking away from the military, I thought I'd finally found ground where no one could dictate how I lived. 60 acres of timber and pasture, ironclad in ink. I told myself when I signed, no more bosses, no more bureaucracy. But Linda, with her clipboard crown, had decided otherwise. I clenched the notice, the words restricted access glaring up at me. My dog winced softly at my feet, sensing the storm brewing in me. I whispered into the night, "If she wants a fight, she'll get one." Morning came with the grinding roar of machinery. At first I thought it was a neighbor clearing brush, but the closer it got, the more deliberate it sounded, steel biting stone. I threw on my jacket and headed for the property line. My gut sank as I saw it. Right where Cedar Ridge began, a backhoe's teeth tore into the gravel. Men in hard hats piled dirt on either side, carving a ditch right before the new steel gate. A trench, a moat. Even if I cut the lock, my truck would sink axle deep in the muck. Linda wasn't satisfied with a barricade. She wanted isolation. She wanted me desperate. I stormed toward her. She was perched in a folding chair, sun hat tilted, sipping iced tea like it was a parade. When she spotted me, she raised her glass in mock salute. "Community improvements," she called out, "keeping trespassers out." The word stung worse than the welder's sparks. Trespasser on the road my family had driven for decades, where fire trucks, mail carriers, and delivery vans passed without issue. To her, I wasn't a landowner. I was an intruder. I called the sheriff. When a deputy finally arrived, weary eyes beneath his hat brim, he shook his head at the spectacle of the gate and trench. I thrust my deed at him, voice tight with fury. "This is my only road. They're cutting me off from my own home." He sighed, scratching the back of his neck. "Technically, the HOA owns this stretch. They can restrict access." I nearly exploded. "So they can trap me on my own land." He hesitated. "You might have a case under easement law. Long-term use could establish right-of-way. But those cases take time, months, maybe years. Until then, it's a gray area. A gray area." That was the law's way of saying I was on my own. I turned back toward my farm, rage boiling in my chest. My boots crunched gravel, each step heavier than the last. I wasn't just walking home. I was marching into a siege. For the next few days, I improvised. I borrowed a dirt bike and hacked a rough trail through the forest, weaving between roots and rocks, across streams that splashed mud on my jeans. It wasn't pretty, but it got me out. Supplies became missions. A buddy from my service days flew a chopper low one evening, dropping pallets of feed and fuel into my pasture. I'll never forget the look on Linda's face as the helicopter hovered over her pristine subdivision, grass whipping, papers flying from her porch. She nearly choked on her lemonade. Within hours, she filed a complaint about unauthorized aerial disturbances. The sheriff tossed it in the trash, but Linda wasn't done. Soon I started receiving HOA notices, each one thicker than the last. Noise violations, property damage, accusations, even a fine for industrial machinery at midnight. Absurd, since I wasn't even a member. Certified letters stacked on my desk like bricks in a wall, each signed with her neat, sharp pen stroke daggers on paper. She wanted to bury me in bureaucracy, to grind me down until I folded. Then came the night that changed everything. The sky cracked open with summer lightning, rain hammering the tin roof. Through the storm, I caught the flash of red and blue lights flickering against the trees. I sprinted to the property line. An ambulance idled at the trench, sirens muted, tires spinning helplessly in the mud. A neighbor, an older man with heart trouble, had collapsed. The paramedics shouted across the ditch, their voices frantic. I guided them to my dirt trail, loading their gear onto my bike trailer. We jolted through the woods, roots slamming beneath the tires, mud spraying. By the time we reached the farmhouse, precious minutes had been lost. The man survived, but just barely. I stood in the rain, clothes soaked, chest heaving. The flashing ambulance lights painted Linda's gate red. My fists clenched. It wasn't just about me anymore. Her power games had nearly cost a man his life. The next morning, I filed a complaint with the sheriff, attaching the ambulance report. His voice was tired on the phone. "If this hits court, that trench will look real bad for the HOA. I smiled grimly. Good, because I'm done playing nice. That night, I unrolled a set of old blueprints across my kitchen table. Field sketches I hadn't touched since the army. Reinforced culverts, bypass tunnels, load calculations. The rain tapped the windows like a ticking clock. My pencil traced the lines slowly, the plan taking shape. If Linda wanted to dig down, I would go deeper. The gate and the trench weren't the end of the road. They were the beginning of something she'd never see coming. The fuse was lit. The war had begun. She wanted to dig down. Fine. I decided I'd go deeper. The plan didn't come from bravado. It came from a lifetime of solving impossible problems with nothing but a pencil, a patch of ground, and stubborn hands. I spread the old field sketches on the workbench, traced routes with a finger, imagining a path that would leave the road above untouched while giving me a way through. It was a gamble, cloaked in practicality, less bombast, more brute patience. The moon cut a thin slice of light through the workshop window as I circled the map again, thinking not of glory, but of safety, my own, my neighbors, the people who might need an ambulance someday. I called 2 friends from my service days, men who'd learned to move quietly and think clearly under pressure. There was Hank, whose laugh lived in his throat and who could weld a frame with his eyes closed, and Ray, who had a knack for making bad plans work with duct tape and a grin. They didn't ask for a speech. They came. The first night we started under a canopy of stars, shovels like slow metronomes, sweat stinging our eyes. We worked in silence at first, then in short bursts of conversation that kept the cold away, old jokes, old scars, the kind of talk that stitches men back into the world after wars. We kept it simple because simplicity keeps you alive. We brought what we could carry without drawing attention: lamps with dim switches, kerosene heaters, tarps to hide fresh piles of soil. We chose ours when the neighborhood quieted, when Linda's security guard was more likely scrolling his phone than watching the gate. The first blows of the shovel felt ceremonial, like the first notes of a song you didn't know the melody to. Each scoop of dirt was a small act of defiance and also a small prayer of discretion. We hauled soil into wheelbarrows and spread it thin across a field where no one would notice. The work bent our backs and straightened our resolve. At night, we rigged crude vents and a battery-powered fan to keep air moving. Nothing technical. Nothing that would teach a man how to build a cave worth a fortune. We learned quickly that the earth has moods. Some nights it held like a secret, compact and cooperative. Other nights it shifted, whispering like an annoyed animal. Once, the ceiling sighed and a shower of grit slid down a wall where we'd been working. For a heartbeat, the space felt smaller than a coffin. The lights flashed, hearts thudded. We backed away and braced the wall with timber scavenged from an old Barno engineering textbook formula. Just instincts and muscle. Hank muttered something about paperwork and ghosts, and we went at it again. Slower, smarter. Linda's daytime swagger continued. She strutted the gate like it was a triumph, brow glossy under the sun. She posted a new sign. She hired a kid with a badge and an attitude who loved the sound of authority. She walked the trench as if it were a moat fit for a queen. Her little kingdom chalked up each new harassment as victory points. But the nights were ours, and the inching progress of that dark corridor became a quiet truth. I tasted like coffee. I kept a log, not because I wanted to instruct anyone, but because facts help cut through the noise. Times, dates, how many buckets hold. Motion cam notes we'd later use as evidence. Each line in that notebook felt like insurance, a paper trail for a life that some people wanted to fence off. Word traveled like summer dust. At first, it was one old friend, then another neighbor who had his own Scabadova story with Linda. People brought sandwiches and water, then came with cords and lanterns, then came with 2 hands and a pair of welding goggles. The work turned into a watch, shifts traded like currencies. Elder men who'd never left the county sat with thermoses and told us how things used to be: neighbors, talking over fences instead of through attorneys. Teenagers with calloused fingers learned to hold a torch. A retired librarian showed up one Saturday with 10 donuts and a printout of county easement law she'd found online. She didn't understand the math, but she understood justice. The tunnel became a community project without the pomp, an unspoken coalition against the petty cruelty of a small crown. Linda reacted the way tyrants always do, by trying to outdo the spectacle. She installed motion cameras, bright floodlights that buzzed like angry insects, and posted employees to watch the gate at all hours. She called the sheriff more times than a man calls his mother. She filed more certified letters, each one a crystallized threat. The HOA's media campaign tried to paint me as the danger someone unhinged, willing to dig under private property for spite. They used words like unauthorized and reckless, and the local rumor mill obliged, turning my quiet grit into narrative fuel for angry coffee conversation. A headline here, a passive-aggressive PTA email there, but for every piece of paper she waved, another neighbor quietly handed me a photograph or a memory of some petty fine she'd levied years ago. The tide, stubborn as a mule, started to turn. Our work hit a snag 3 nights in when a pocket of clay shifted under the dim beam of my lamp. The floor we'd tamped loosened and the ceiling groaned, a low, gut-deep sound. I remember Hank dropping his tool, the air thick with the sudden awareness of where we wander a road, under a world of rules, with only trust between us. "We stop," he said, voice raw. We took stock instead. We braced the wall with more timber, packed earth tight on the floor, then moved forward inch by careful inch. The near collapse didn't break us. If anything, it sharpened our focus. The work became less about speed and more about survival. We dug with new respect for the ground and for the fragility of the choices we'd made. There were moments when fear threaded through me like a cold wire. Once, headlights cut across the field, tractor lights slicing silhouettes through the trees. For a second, my heart performed a double take. An HOA truck, maybe, or a county truck on some routine route. We froze like prey until the headlights moved on. Once, a patrol car idled to a stop near the gate, and the kid with the fake badge peered into the dark with his flashlight, voice loud and petulant. We held our breath until the lights went away. Each close call tightened the knot in our throats, but none of it eclipsed the purpose. Every rustle in the night made the sunrise feel more like deliverance. On the 13th night, under a sky spotted with cold, distant stars, we reached a point where the tunnel bent toward daylight. I drove my truck up to the field and sat there feeling small in the glow of headlights. The work of weeks folded into a narrow opening just big enough to crawl through. I ran a camera on a battery and left it rolling because I knew moments made the best medicine for truth. There was something lawless and holy about that final push. Men bent over and shoveling by headlamp. Laughter like muffled cannon fire when someone dropped a bucket of dirt on the wrong foot. A quiet cheer when a brace went into place and held. We slipped a last sheet of plywood across the opening to hide the mouth, tamped earth lightly over it, and called it a night. The days after that felt like brushing your teeth before being filmed. We kept doing normal things, family work, chores while carrying the secret under our feet. Linda paced like a woman who smelled defeat and didn't know how to stop. She posted more signs, more threats, more meetings in the clubhouse about protecting community standards. I answered none of them publicly. I chose silence, which does better work sometimes than any speech. Every motion cam we'd installed showed the board's activity, a welder's torch flaring at midnight, a crew hauling gravel to the trench at dawn, board members clustering and nodding. We archived it all. Evidence is patient, and patience pays. Then something unexpected happened. A teenager named Jake, who lived 3 houses in from the gate, dove into the project because he wanted to learn welding for summer bucks. He brought with him a shaky handheld that captured something no camera would have, the human face of Linda's campaign. One evening, Jake filmed Linda from a distance, waving her arms, voice high with fury as she unloaded a rant about outsiders and keeping our neighborhood safe. The clip caught her saying, in a voice meant for the choir of the loyal, "We'll make an example." It wasn't the dramatic line you'd stitch into a movie trailer. It was too offhand, too real. When Jake sent the clip to me, my hands went cold. That slip, this petty menace with teeth, was the kind of thing a judge notices. We didn't go looking for a viral moment. It found us the morning I decided to test the tunnel. It was a quiet dawn, the kind that makes the trees look like they're still holding their breath. We started the engine of an old pickup and eased it toward the secret mouth, the light slicing the dark. For a heartbeat, everything felt absurd, like a boy with a secret fort, the thrill of being unseen. The truck rolled forward, the gravel crunching like applause, and then we were through. The other side opened to the county road like a secret handshake, and the world smelled of diesel and cold air and a kind of hungry relief. I parked, killed the engine, and for the first time in weeks I breathed without thinking about gates and letters and fines. I waited for the sunrise to be the real reveal, for a crowd to gather, for Linda to see that her fortress could be bypassed by a few hands and stubborn intent. What I didn't expect was how quick whispers become winds. By noon, the clip I'd taken, grainy honest, was on 3 different community message boards. Somebody had uploaded Jake's footage. Someone else had posted a shaky video of Linda stomping at the gate. People started sharing with a sort of glee that only small towns know, like triumph had become their favorite news. And with each share, my story stopped being mine. It became a ledger, and the ledger had witnesses. When a movement is built on truth, it does odd things. Neighbors who had been too scared to say anything began to nudge each other in the feed. Old grievances that had been muttered over fences turned into testimonies told in grocery store aisles. A retired schoolteacher who'd kept quiet about an HOA fine for an overlong wreath posted her receipt with a scolding note. The county fire marshal called me and asked if he could see the footage. "It's compelling," he said, voice slow. "We need to document this." That was enough. The tunnel, the late nights, the near collapses, the donuts and lanterns, none of it was glamorous. But together, it began to build something Linda could neither weld nor fine into oblivion. The dawn of the reveal felt less like a sunrise and more like a mission briefing. My truck sat at the mouth of the tunnel, headlights off, engine humming low. The walls we'd braced groaned softly, a reminder of the nights spent with dirt under our nails and fear in our throats. I gripped the wheel tight enough for my knuckles to pale, heart racing not from nerves but from the clarity of purpose. This was the moment. This was where weeks of backbreaking defiance would break open into daylight. I eased the truck forward. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as the darkness wrapped around me. For a moment it felt like driving into the veins of the earth itself. Each timber brace passed overhead like ribs in the chest of some great beast. The string of bulbs we'd rigged glowed faint yellow, flickering with each vibration. Hank's voice echoed in my memory. "Don't think of it as a tunnel. Think of it as a bridge, only sideways." I forced a grin, kept the wheel steady. 100 feet later, light cracked through. Not the weak shine of our lamps, but the cold, bright certainty of morning sun. My chest loosened as the truck nosed out onto the county road. The air crisp and open. No trench, no gate, no clipped heels clicking on gravel. Just freedom, plain and unapologetic. I parked on the shoulder, cut the engine and let silence roar in my ears. For the first time in weeks, I had left my farm without a detour, and I had done it without bending to Linda's decree. But the real show wasn't the drive. It was the reveal. Cameras I'd rigged near the gate blinked awake as motion sensors caught the first shuffle of heels. Right on time, Linda strutted into view, clipboard under her arm, sunglasses perched high like a crown. She tapped her phone, likely logging another violation to her stack. Her lips moved as if she was rehearsing a scolding speech. Then she froze, her eyes locked on me, standing casually beside my truck on the county road, arms folded, a smile tugging at my mouth. She glanced at the gate, the trench, then back at me. Her jaw dropped. For a moment, the HOA queen was speechless. Then she stumbled forward, heels stabbing the dirt, scanning the ground like she'd lost something. When she spotted the faint mound of earth concealing the tunnel's mouth, her face drained of color. "No," she hissed, kneeling to scrape at the soil. "No, no, no." The cameras caught it all. Her frantic hands clawing dirt, her sunglasses sliding off, her scream echoing across the valley like a wounded animal. She hurled her clipboard to the gravel, stomped her heels until dust rose, then unleashed a screech that could have shattered glass. It wasn't authority anymore, it was desperation, raw and ugly. And by noon, it wasn't just mine to witness. It belonged to the internet. I uploaded the footage to local forums, neighborhood groups, anywhere HOA gossip liked to fester. Within hours, shares multiplied. Screenshots of Linda's meltdown raced across Facebook, captions dripping with laughter. One read, "Queen Linda dethroned by a tunnel." Another, "Karen versus Culvert. Culvert wins by evening." People I didn't know were tagging me in posts, calling me the tunnel guy. Strangers sent me clips of Linda ranting in community chats, demanding the video be taken down. But once a video lives online, it doesn't die. It multiplies. Neighbors started stopping me in town, slapping my back with grins wide as rivers. The cashier at the feed store winked, saw the video. "You should charge admission for that tunnel." A farmer at the diner muttered. About damn time someone stood up to her. Even folks from outside the county drove by slow, gawking at the infamous gates like it was a roadside attraction. Linda had built a fortress to isolate me. Instead, she'd built a stage, and the whole county had front row seats. But Linda wasn't the type to bow out. 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. He handed me a thick envelope. Inside, a lawsuit. Cedar Ridge, HOA, represented by Linda, accusing me of destruction of community infrastructure and illegal tunneling beneath private property. I laughed out loud when I read it. Illegal tunneling. She made it sound like I'd built a subway system. But I knew better than to underestimate paperwork. A lawsuit wasn't about truth. It was about time, money, and attrition. Fortunately, the video had earned me more than laughs. It had earned me allies. People who'd been burned by HOAs in other towns reached out, sharing stories of petty fines, foreclosure threats, power abused in the name of community standards. One couple donated money toward legal fees after telling me how their HOA once fined them $200 for leaving Christmas lights up until January 2nd. Another man, bitter but hopeful, sent me copies of his own case files, saying, "If you beat her, maybe there's hope for the rest of us." That's how I found Rebecca Sloan. Sharp eyes, sharper tongue, a local attorney with a reputation for slicing through red tape like a scalpel. When she saw the video and the lawsuit, she didn't flinch. "They picked the wrong man to corner," she said simply. Together we filed a countersuit: harassment, obstruction of property access, reckless endangerment for blocking emergency services. We submitted the ambulance delay report as Exhibit A. Linda's letters stacked, neatly as Exhibit B. Video footage of the trench and gate became Exhibit C. Then came the bombshell. An email appeared in my inbox one night from an anonymous sender. Attached were scanned copies of internal HOA emails. In them, Linda bragged openly about the strategy to cut Carter off until he learns compliance. Another line chilled me. Leverage access as a tool of control. It wasn't speculation anymore. It was her words, her plan, in writing. I forwarded the emails to Rebecca. She read them, then leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading. "Congratulations, Miles. She just handed us Exhibit D." Meanwhile, Linda grew more unhinged at the gate. She hired another so-called security guard, a young guy with aviator sunglasses and a fake badge he probably bought online. He strutted around like a cop, but everyone could see he was just a kid playing dress-up. The cameras captured him trying to wave down a county deputy one afternoon, demanding ID. The deputy barked a laugh and drove off. Even Cedar Ridge residents began to whisper that Linda had lost her grip. At the grocery store, I overheard one mutter, "This isn't HOA business anymore. This is tyranny still." She doubled down. At one meeting inside the HOA clubhouse, she railed against me like I was a criminal mastermind. A neighbor snuck me footage, her pacing, ranting, spittle catching in the fluorescent lights as she warned about me building a militia underground. Her audience sat silent, eyes glazed. At one point a man raised his hand. "Or maybe," he said, voice dry, "it's just a tunnel." Laughter erupted, drowning out her tirade. I knew the tide was turning, but the true test lay ahead. The courtroom. Rebecca drilled me on testimony, making sure I stayed calm, factual, precise. "Let her unravel," she advised. "Judges don't like theatrics. Linda can't help herself." I nodded. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. She'd already shown the world who she was. The tunnel wasn't just dirt and steel. It was proof that her power was an illusion, and that illusion was cracking. The date was set. Early fall. Cedar Ridge, HOA versus Miles Carter. The showdown wouldn't be fought with welders or trenches. It would be fought with words, evidence, and the simple weight of truth. And deep down, I knew Linda Hara was about to face something she could never weld shut, never scream away, never fine into submission. She was about to face the one thing she feared most, accountability. The courthouse smelled faintly of varnished wood and old paper, the kind of smell that carries both history and judgment. My boots echoed on the polished floor as I walked past a line of reporters, microphones snapping toward me like hungry mouths. "Mr. Carter, how did you dig the tunnel?" one shouted. Another called out, "Do you regret defying the HOA?" I kept my expression steady, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Not for a second," I answered, then pushed through the heavy doors into the room where my fate and Linda's would be decided. Linda was already seated at the plaintiff's table, pearl necklace gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. She looked less like a leader and more like a vulture waiting for scraps, eyes locked on me with a glare so sharp I could feel it slice across the aisle. Her lawyer leaned close, whispering frantically, but Linda barely blinked. She wanted me rattled. She wanted me to feel small. But the mountain of binders stacked on Rebecca's table said otherwise. The judge, a gray-haired man with a stern jaw, adjusted his glasses and called the case. Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association versus Miles Carter. His voice carried finality, a tone that told the room he'd heard every excuse under the sun and had no patience left for theatrics. "Let's proceed." Linda's attorney went first, spinning a story about community integrity, about dangerous rogue behavior, about a man tunneling under private property without permission. He used words like reckless and destabilizing. At one point, he even muttered the phrase eco-terrorist, which made the gallery shift and murmur. The judge's brow furrowed, unimpressed. Still, the lawyer pressed on, trying to paint me as some unhinged loner whose obsession had endangered families. Then Rebecca stood calm, precise, deliberate. She began not with emotion but with facts. "My client's property is landlocked. For decades, access was openly established through Cedar Ridge, what the HOA calls infrastructure. The law recognizes as a right-of-way." She explained easement law in plain English, so clear even a school kid could have followed it. Then she gestured toward the trench and gate photos. What they built were not improvements, they were obstructions, deliberate, malicious, and dangerous. The first witness called was the UPS driver, the same man whose viral moment had the county laughing for weeks. He strode to the stand with a grin, still wearing his brown uniform, still radiating the energy of someone who didn't scare easy. Rebecca asked him to recount what happened the day Linda shrieked at him for parking. He leaned into the microphone, voice steady. "She told me I couldn't deliver packages without her permission. I told her, 'Lady, I am federal.'" Laughter rippled through the courtroom, even from the gallery where the bailiff tried to shush people. The judge banged his gavel once, but even he couldn't hide the twitch of amusement at the corner of his mouth. Then came the ambulance paramedic, a man with tired eyes, uniform crisp. He described pulling up to the trench with sirens blaring, only to find the road barricaded. His testimony was blunt, unpolished. "We lost minutes. That can be the difference between life and death." He paused, swallowing hard. "The patient survived, but barely. When he held up the official report, the words "delayed response due to obstruction" printed clear as day. The judge leaned forward, pen pausing mid. Exhibit A landed like a hammer blow. Next came my turn. Rebecca walked me through my background: 2 decades as a military engineer, my purchase of the land, the deed ironclad and independent. I described the day Linda confronted me, the gate welding, the trench digging, the notice with its gold seal. I spoke of the helicopter drop, of the dirt bike trail, of the certified letters piling up like sandbags. Then I told the story of the ambulance, of guiding paramedics through mud and trees while precious minutes ticked away. My throat tightened as I recounted it, but I didn't look at Linda. I looked at the judge, and I saw his pen pause again. Finally, Linda was called to testify. She strutted to the stand as if it were a stage, her heels clicking like a metronome of arrogance. Her lawyer guided her gently at first. "Did you authorize the trench?" "Yes," she said, chin high. "Did you consider emergency access?" "Irrelevant," she answered flatly. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Rebecca stepped forward, eyes sharp. "Miss Harrow, are you aware of the National Fire Protection Association standards requiring unobstructed access for emergency vehicles?" Linda smirked. "Those don't apply to us. We're a private community." Gasps filled the room. The judge's gavel banged for order, but the damage was done. In that one line, she'd admitted what we all knew. She thought Cedar Ridge was above the law. Rebecca let the silence hang heavy before projecting the leaked emails onto the courtroom screen. Linda's own words lit up in bold. "Cut Carter off until he learns compliance. Leverage access as a tool of control." Linda sputtered, insisting the emails were taken out of context. But the more she talked, the deeper she sank. By the third contradiction, even her lawyer rubbed his temples, sweat beading his forehead. The gallery shifted, neighbors exchanging glances that said it all. This wasn't leadership. This was obsession unraveling under fluorescent light. The next 2 days stacked witness upon witness upon witness. The neighbor whose wife had gone into labor testified, holding up a photo of his newborn daughter. "If not for that tunnel," he said, voice trembling, "my girl might not be here today." The gallery went quiet, the weight of his words heavier than any legal brief. The judge's gaze lingered on the baby's photo for a long, quiet moment before he nodded. Jaw tight. Rebecca presented the blueprints and soil analysis of the tunnel, built to higher standards than most county culverts, she said plainly. The judge flipped through the diagrams, his lips pressing thin. Linda's lawyer tried to argue safety risks, but compared to the evidence, his words scattered like leaves in wind. Closing arguments arrived with the weight of inevitability. Linda's lawyer rambled about community rights precedent, the dangers of rogue behavior. Rebecca stood crisp as a blade. "This case isn't about bylaws, it's about abuse of power." The HOA turned a lifeline into a weapon. They endangered lives, fabricated violations, and sought to extort a landowner into submission. The law does not support tyranny. It never has. It never will. Silence followed. The judge leaned back, hands steepled, eyes heavy on Linda, then on me. Finally, he spoke. "I've heard enough." He shuffled papers, then looked directly at Linda. The actions of the Cedar Ridge HOA were reckless, malicious, and in direct violation of Mr. Carter's rights. This court recognizes his easement and grants permanent, unrestricted access to his property via Cedar Ridge Road. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge wasn't done. The gate and trench are to be removed immediately at the HOA's expense. Furthermore, due to evidence of harassment and endangerment, the Cedar Ridge HOA will pay damages in the amount of $250,000, including attorney's fees. His eyes narrowed. "And Miss Harrow, you are personally fined $25,000 for abuse of authority and are hereby removed as HOA president, effective immediately." Linda's face collapsed, color draining until she looked like a ghost in pearls. Her lawyer slumped, defeated. Meanwhile, the gallery erupted into hushed cheers, neighbors and farmers who'd been waiting months to see justice finally fall. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like forever. The gavel banged, and it was done. As I left the courthouse, reporters swarmed again, their voices like waves. "How does it feel to win?" one shouted. I paused, glanced back at the doors where Linda still sat frozen, and said simply, "It feels like justice." Cameras flashed, questions swirled, but none of it mattered. The war of gates, trenches, and tunnels wasn't just over. It had been judged, weighed, and settled. And Linda Harrow had lost more than her throne. She had lost her mask. The roar of diesel engines carried across Cedar Ridge like the sound of a verdict being enforced. Days after the ruling, county crews rolled in with trucks, welders, and bulldozers. Neighbors gathered at the edge of the road, arms folded, some with coffee cups in hand, others with cameras ready. Sparks flew as welders sliced through the steel bars Linda once called infrastructure. The gate that had stood, like a crown jewel of her power, collapsed in less than 15 minutes. The trench she'd sunk thousands into filling with gravel was erased by a bulldozer's blade in under an hour. All her walls, all her weapons, dismantled piece by piece until the road looked as it always should, have a simple gravel lane leading to people's homes. I stood with Hank and Ray. the men who had sweated beside me in the dirt, watching the fortress crumble. Hank chuckled, shaking his head. Funny how quick a queen loses her castle. Neighbors around us laughed, the sound lighter than I'd heard in months. Some clapped, some filmed, but all of them knew they were watching more than just demolition. They were watching the end of an empire that Linda wasn't there. Rumor had it she stayed inside her house with the blinds drawn, too ashamed to face the community she'd ruled with fines and threats. By evening, her car was spotted creeping out of Cedar Ridge, headlights low, turning away from the road she no longer controlled. Some said she'd fled to another suburb where no one knew her name. Others claimed she stayed locked inside, too humiliated to shop for groceries without whispers following her down the aisles. For me, her absence said enough. A crown that heavy never fits again once it's been taken off. The HOA wasted no time in electing new leadership. For the first time in years, residents filled the clubhouse, their voices carrying not fear but determination. They voted for Ellen Drake, a schoolteacher with soft eyes and a firm backbone. Her first act was to issue a public apology. Standing at the podium, she said plainly, "We lost sight of what a community should be. This board will no longer weaponize rules. We will rebuild trust." The room filled with applause, not because she promised miracles, but because she promised honesty. That was more than enough. The story didn't stay contained within Cedar Ridge. Local papers ran headlines. HOA president fined, ousted after tunnel showdown. The viral video of Linda's meltdown resurfaced, spawning memes and even t-shirts at the feed store. One design showed a cartoon tunnel with the words "miles ahead of the HOA." Another had Linda drawn as a medieval guard screaming at villagers while a farmer slipped under a hidden door. Strangers driving through the county stopped to ask directions to the famous tunnel like it was a landmark on a map. I decided to lean into it, not for profit, not for glory, but because symbols matter. With the help of a local welder, I commissioned a sign over the tunnel's entrance. On unveiling day, the community gathered in my pasture for what we jokingly called the Liberation Cookout. Smoke curled from grills, kids raced four-wheelers, veterans hoisted flags, neighbors brought pies and guitars. Even the sheriff stopped by to shake my hand. When I pulled the tarp away, the crowd roared with laughter. The steel sign read, "The Harrow Passage, in memory of petty tyrants everywhere." Cameras flashed. A teenager filmed himself walking through the tunnel, narrating, "This is where Karen lost the war." The clip went viral in hours, shared by people far beyond our county. For weeks afterward, I'd see cars with out-of-state plates parked at the fence line, their passengers wanting to take photos by the sign. I never charged them. I'd just tell the story, sometimes with more exaggeration than truth, watching them laugh as they realized how ridiculous and how real it all was. Life in Cedar Ridge shifted. Lawns grew without measuring sticks. Porch lights glowed late without letters arriving in the mail. Kids left bikes sprawled in driveways without fines. A farmer down the road set bales of hay by the roadside with a sign, "Take what you need." People started helping instead of tattling. The atmosphere of fear that Linda had cultivated evaporated, replaced by something warmer, something freer. Even Ellen admitted at a meeting, "We all let fear rule us." But fear only grows when no one resists it. Linda's name survived only as a punchline. The Harrow Passage sign sprouted graffiti nicknames. Karen Crossing, Dictator Detour, Gate to Nowhere. I let most of them stay. Every spray-painted joke was another nail in the coffin of her reign. People laughed now where once they had bowed their heads. And laughter, I realized, was more powerful than any gavel. Yet beneath the humor, the lesson stayed sharp. I often thought about the nights underground, the groan of shifting earth, the way one wrong move could have buried us alive. I thought of the ambulance delayed, the neighbor's newborn saved because of a tunnel she should never have needed. It wasn't just about cleverness or stubbornness. It was about what happens when small tyrannies go unchecked. Give someone a clipboard, let them taste power, and watch as rules turn into weapons. That was the real story, not just that I'd dug my way out, but that I'd refused to let silence become complicity. One crisp October evening, I sat on my porch, a beer in hand, watching the last glow of sunset bleed across the horizon. The UPS truck rumbled down the Knockler Road. No gates, no trenches, no obstacles, just the steady crunch of gravel. The driver honked twice, leaned out, and called, "Still love that tunnel, Miles." I raised my bottle in salute. The sound of his tires was sweeter than any victory speech. The fight had scarred me, yes, but it had also bonded us. Neighbors who'd barely spoken before now shared meals. People who once whispered now laughed out loud. My land was still mine, my deed unshaken, but what had grown out of the dirt was bigger than property lines. It was proof. Proof that one voice, calm and stubborn, can ripple outward and change everything. Proof that power only lasts as long as people allow it. I hadn't wanted to be a symbol. I'd wanted peace, nothing more. But sometimes life puts a shovel in your hands and asks you to dig deeper, not for escape, but for truth. My tunnel wasn't just steel and soil. It was defiance carved into the earth, a reminder that when someone says you can't, you show them you can. So here's the lesson I carried from the Harrow Passage. Don't let anyone wall you in. Know your rights. Stand your ground. And when they build a gate to trap you, Don't just break it, dig under it, walk through it, and remind them that freedom doesn't answer to clipboards or crowns. As the band at the cookout played their last song and the crowd cheered, I looked around at neighbors laughing, kids chasing fireflies, flags fluttering under the autumn sky. The tunnel's mouth glowed under a spotlight, the Harrow Passage sign gleaming above it like a beacon. Linda had wanted obedience. Instead, she forged unity. She'd tried to wall us off. Instead, she'd built a community. And standing there, beer raised in a mock salute to the night, I realized the truth is simple as gravel under tires. People will always find a way forward, even if they have to dig a tunnel to do it.